You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Happy Friday. Way off center here. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I am your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group. And it's kind of quiet. It's kind of a quiet before the storm to some degree here, because next week Michigan goes on its spring game. Spring vacation. We are several weeks removed from the spring game. We got the NFL draft coming up next week as well, coinciding exactly with the Michigan travel of it all. So it'll be interesting to see how we make all of that unfold, or, get all of that in order. But nonetheless, we do have a couple of things to talk about. I want to get to KRT at Farmark84. He had asked a question, but he did while I was already recording the podcast. So we'll get to his question. We'll expand it a little bit. We're also going to get to I don't think we really covered much in the game by game FPI for Michigan, but we'll start off with something that Rece Davis said on the ESPN College GameDay podcast. So if you recalled earlier in the week, Michigan did not get a lot of love in the advanced analytics, which it's kind of like what else is new, right? Because last year it was the same deal. Michigan was 7th. This year they're 6th. And it kind of seemed like, why is Michigan not getting any love? And at least last year it was kind of like, oh, okay, well, they're losing Aiden Hutchinson and they're losing David Ojabo and whatever. And so that made some sense. Whereas this year, it doesn't make a lot of sense because clearly they're not, as much as they say what they're waiting and things like that. And someone pointed out like, oh, some of it's the off-season, postseason stuff and whatever. And I mean, that shouldn't carry all the weight in the world, but it still just makes no sense whatsoever, no matter how you spin it, that it would say LSU and Texas, particularly Texas, looks like it's in a more advantageous situation this year than Michigan. Texas certainly could be in terms of being in the Big 12 still. That doesn't seem like it has an obvious winner. Oklahoma really fell off last year. TCU loses a lot of components. Kansas State certainly looks like they could potentially be that team as well. But at least it makes a little bit of sense, but it doesn't make any sense either. But at least like some logic prevails here. So Rece Davis goes on the podcast and he posted this video. I don't know if there's more to it because I didn't go and look at the podcast. But this is what he said. He said, Michigan has a proven quarterback that I think is going to improve greatly this year. They've got the best cornerback in America in Will Johnson. That's some pretty high praise right there. They've got some transfers on both lines of scrimmage, including a pass rusher that should shore up some of the things that they've lost. They've done a really good job in the transfer portal the last couple of years, particularly on the lines of scrimmage. They've got their running backs coming back, a couple of wide receivers that might be even bigger threats, and a transfer tight end from Indiana, I believe. I think if I had to fill out the ballot right now based on what I know, the type of production I know I'm going to get, I think I'd put Michigan number 1. That's pretty high from Rece Davis because I've looked at the AP ballots because he does have an AP vote, and it seems like Michigan's often lagged in his AP ballots. Right, like when everyone else was putting Michigan at like number 4 or something like last year, he had him more like at number 6. I've always noticed that he's always kind of lagging behind the rest. But what he is saying is exactly kind of what I have believed when it comes to all this. Now, I'd still give Georgia the benefit of the doubt, even despite all of their personnel losses, because they've kind of built into a powerhouse. It's been. Listen, I'm the last person. Despite Georgia being kind of like my number 2 team growing up when it comes to college football, despite me, still having I have a weird affinity for Georgia in some ways. And then in other ways, I also hate them, right? Because for years, Georgia was the most talented team in college football and couldn't even get like to the SEC championship game most of the time, right? And yet they were always receiving all of this love, kind of the same way that Penn State has, or, sometimes Wisconsin or North Carolina, Texas, some of these others. So I've always been really hard on Georgia. I'm taking the opposite approach now, because when you're the 2-time defending national champion, you deserve some benefit of the doubt, right? And so I think Georgia does deserve that. But they're not even considered number 1 in FPI. They're considered number 3 behind Ohio State and Alabama, which, again, kind of baffles me. But, again, returning production, we've talked about it so much here. It's to me, it's the most important thing of anything, is having a team full of guys who have done it before. And when you listen to what Jesse Minter had talked about, like, a guy like Ernest Hausner, like, he's played in the big house. You can trust him, because even though he was with another team, what he's like when the lights are on. That's really important, because, and there's a reason why not every 5-star pans out, or 4-star, and why sometimes 3 stars far excel, right? Like, why, when you look at, even with Michigan, guys like Hassan Haskins or Kwity Paye, why they have turned out to be really good players, it's because it's not an exact science. Some guys peak in high school, some guys are Trip McNeely. Some guys end up being finding that extra gear and doing better, developing more and figuring things out the more that things go on. And so when you have a group of guys that have beaten Ohio State, just ran them right off the field, and they did it without Blake Corum. You have a group of guys that know what it's like to at least get to the college football playoff, and then you bring the majority of them back, it only stands to reason that that would be a team that you would have a lot of confidence in. I can't say that if I was an Ohio State fan, I think I would be living kind of a little bit more in a hopeful type of situation, because you don't know what their quarterback is going to do. And I know FPI sat there and said, okay, well, they've got Marvin Harrison, Emeka Egbuka, Mayan Williams, and Travion Henderson. And that's a lot of talent. But the most important position on the field, you don't know what they have. With Michigan, you know that JJ is at least good enough to get you there. So the question is, does he take a step forward? Does he take a step backward? I have more thoughts. So I guess I can continue, because my only other thought here really is they've got the best cornerback in America in Will Johnson. That's just such effusive praise. I guess the question is, is he number 1? Because, it's a very limited sample size. Certainly he has the look of being that, but what corners would you necessarily take over him? I guess is when I started looking at that, it's like, that feels like maybe a little too soon, but that feels pretty good, right? But I don't know 100% that I'm there. But that's about as good of praise as you're going to get, especially from Rece Davis. So that's pretty solid. So let's get to KRT at Farmer's question. We'll expand upon it a little bit in order to fill it out, and then we'll go from there. We'll see where we go. I think that's where we're at this gloomy, cold, wet Friday. Something exciting is coming to Built.com on April 22nd. I don't have all the details yet, but the excitement is real, and it's something you won't want to miss. If you know how Built works, they have the most incredible protein bars in the world, and they do these amazing flavor drops with unreal flavors in limited quantity. So mark your calendars. Head to Built.com on Saturday, April 22nd, to be one of the first to discover what all the hype is about. I can't wait to see what the new flavor is. Make sure to use the promo code LOCKEDON15, and you'll get 15% off of your order. All right, I clicked on the absolute wrong thing. Here we go. So KRT at Farmer 84, part of the leaders and best on our Michigan mailbag, got his question in while I was recording yesterday. So he did not make the list because I'm not going off of the I'm not sitting there refreshing Twitter. It all goes into a Word document, and that's how things get in order and how I don't miss things. But that does mean that sometimes we're going to miss things for other reasons like that. So he asked, what do you think are the biggest improvements we'll see from JJ this year? So we'll start with JJ, and then I'll expand where I think maybe each position group and different players can get better, and maybe that'll take us to the end. So we'll that's where we'll go. So as far as JJ is concerned, it's what I think that the biggest area of improvement is consistency, because at the beginning of the year, he was able to throw those deep bombs with accuracy. I mean, he was just incredibly accurate, right? Like he threw for like 95% in the first 3 games or something like that. He was like 3 for 3, 4 for 4. And then I think he missed like one pass in the UConn game or something like that. It was like an insane hit rate. But then Michigan went very run heavy. And then when they started asking him to throw again, particularly that Rutgers game, it just didn't seem like it was all kind of put together, right? Because he looked really good in the Iowa game. He looked really good in the Indiana game. Maryland was a little bit iffier. But again, that's a step up in defense. People are going to get a little bit more in the scouting report, understanding a little bit more about what you're about, right? So I think part of it is being able to identify and throw an accurate strike when you absolutely need to. I think that's a big part of what JJ needs to do. And certainly he's capable of it because we've seen it. But again, the competition steps up. And then you have games like Ohio State where he really balled out, I think that another area where he can improve is figuring out when to keep and when to give on the zone read type plays. Because there did still seem to be, Michigan's long had this issue where it seems like for whatever reason the quarterback gets really confused as far as that's concerned. And I hope Michigan does use it as an opportunity, with his legs as an opportunity, more so this year. I'm not saying he needs to be Tim Tebow or, Lamar Jackson and run constantly. But I would like to see that as an added threat, because that was one of the things in particular that opposing coaches early in the season last year were always talking about. I'm pretty sure Jim Mora was among them. I remember, it's like, what's the issue with JJ? It's like, well, you have to respect his legs. And by the end of the year, it didn't really feel like that was necessarily a big thing. Now, there were moments where but it was no more than, hey, the play broke down and now he's doing something, rather than it being by design. Some of that might have been Cade not being in, but I do want to see Michigan kind of take more advantage of him. So that's more of a Michigan offense improvement than a JJ improvement. But also, if they do have a situation where it is by design and he could give or keep, I'd like to see him make the right decisions there. And those are the types of things that you get better with as you mature as well, right? So I think that's another big part. And then probably the biggest part that we learned from the TCU game is not putting the ball in harm's way. And sometimes he's going to make some of those crazy throws, and you're going to live with some of those, right? Like the Blake Corum against Penn State throw. It was like, all right, that was amazing. Don't do that again. And then you have the fluky play not too long after the pick six. So you live with some of those, but in some of the bigger moments, you don't necessarily want to try to get away with them, because you're not always going to. Against Purdue, it worked out, right? He had a couple plays against Purdue. It was like, ooh, I wouldn't advise that. Didn't work out against TCU. And you don't want to be finding yourself in either of those types of games making those types of mistakes, right? So I think just decision-making, accuracy, I think he can make those improvements. And certainly we saw even in the spring game, like it didn't look sharp at the beginning. And then he went, was it 6 for 7 or 7 for 8 after that, and finished with going 7 for 10 overall. So it's one of those things where you saw him get better as the game went on, which is important. And that's one of the things that everyone always says about him. As far as running back is concerned, I don't know how you can get Blake Corum to be better than he already was last year. So I'll kind of bypass him to some degree. And I'll talk about Donovan Edwards, who I think he just needs to be able to more consistently able to grind out yards, because while it was very like I said to Josh Newkirk on the sidelines of the Ohio State game, because he was lamenting. He's like, they keep on giving it to Donovan. He's not breaking anything. It's like, because that's how Donovan Edwards works, right? You give him the ball, no gain, 3 yards, 2 yards, no gain, 2 yards, 4 yards, 6 yards, 8 yards, 20 yards, 50 yards. This is kind of how Donovan Edwards operates. I'd like to see him have that same kind of, because that's kind of how Blake Corum was in 2021. I'd like to see Donovan Edwards find a way to be able to grind out yards in the same way that Blake learned to. Because we take for granted what Blake Corum was able to do while he was out there last year, but that is not, like we talked about him, and versus Hassan Haskins, and it was like, well, Hassan Haskins falls forward. You need 3 yards, he's going to get you 4. Blake Corum became the same player, so I'd like to see the same thing of Donovan Edwards. It clearly Mike Hart helped Blake get to that point. I'd like to see the same thing happen with Donovan. Wide receiver, got to find consistency in getting open and being able to come down with catches. Cornelius Johnson, incredibly streaky, right? Like, he needs to play like he did in the Ohio State game or the second half of the Indiana game all the time. It can't be disappears for long stretches and then has like an incredible game. He has that capability. We've seen him be able to make tough catches, but there are also times where it's just like the ball hits him in the hands and it's just he doesn't come up with it. That's been my long gripe with him. Roman Wilson needs to just stay healthy and be consistent that way, because he's got all the promise in the world, and we just need to see him step up in that way. The rest are kind of virtual unknowns, but they just need to step it up. Offensive line, biggest improvement. I would say being able to just kind of stay in there when things break down. Not that it was ever really that bad. It was a little bit more early in the season where it kind of looked like it maybe wasn't that cohesive at moments. You wondered if they were going to be able to repeat the success of 2021. And then by the end of the year, they were. There are also times where I'd like to see them, like they weren't able to grind things out the way that and wear down TCU the same way. So I'd like to see if they see something different, just being able to continue to be themselves. Tight end, I don't know that I have anything there, but let's go to the defensive side of the ball. Biggest areas of improvement moving forward on the defensive side of the ball. Let's do that here momentarily. I'll tell you what, if you're in Michigan, Southeast Michigan, this is definitely curl up and take a nap type of weather. I don't have that luxury today. I've got everything out of the storage unit yesterday in Ann Arbor. So I am officially moved out of Ann Arbor, but now everything's either in my garage or just in boxes everywhere. On the other side of the camera and the computer, there is just a mountain of boxes. Need to get some of that taken care of today with Sarah coming over tonight, best friend coming over tomorrow. So it's I don't know. I don't want to call it a quality problem. It's just a problem. So anyhow, defensively, biggest improvements that I think we could see out of each position group. I think it's obvious on the interior defensive line, and it's what they're working on, which is finding a way to get more of an interior pass rush going, and just a pass rush in general. They were awesome at run defense last year. They seem keen that they'll be able to do the same thing again this year, but they need to be able to get some pressure from the interior. Exterior, I think it's just the biggest area of improvement is figuring out who all those guys are going to be and being able to get home, because you lose your two top pass rushers from the edge. Jalen Harrell obviously is back. They really were singing his praises all spring. Jesse Minter, even more so recently. And then just getting Braden McGregor, Derek Moore, Josiah Stewart all up to speed there. Linebacker, being instinctive and making plays. And that kind of starts with Junior Colson, who had that look as a freshman. Sometimes looked lost in the soup last year, but overall good. But it's if they can just have a nose for the football, And then it's just figuring out how to work out the depth piece because, Nikhai Hill-Green, they're kind of waiting for him to take a step forward now that he's back after a year off. How does Ernest Hausman fit in? Jimmy Rolder needs to kind of get over his, those freshman woes that you have. And Michael Barrett just needs to continue the ascension. But just having a nose for the football and that type of thing, I think is key. Being able to do well, against the run, dropping in coverage. And we kind of saw the horror show happen against TCU, and you hope that doesn't persist. Obviously, if other teams look at the tape and say, "Hey, maybe we can do some of those things and replicate it." I don't really have a note for the safeties. I think they were pretty solid last year. So just continue doing what you're doing. As far as the corners, I just want to see more lockdown. Will Johnson obviously was incredible in the 6 games that we got to see, like a big part of his game. Who's going to be opposite him, right? It's just I want to see more lockdown because that's kind of what we were used to seeing out of the Jordan Lewis Channing Stribling duo or David Long and Lavert Hill is just that ability to kind of take away the pass. And it always works in tandem, right? That the defensive front and the secondary, because if you can get a coverage sack, then you might get a real sack. If you flush the quarterback out of the pocket, he's not going to be able to hit downfield. Those things work in tandem. And I really want to see that happen a little bit more, I think, this year compared to what we've maybe seen the last 2 years. Because I think that in 2021, I think Aiden and David really helped out the back end. And then I think they kind of were more, it was the back end helped out the front end a little bit more last year. And then it's just a question of, can they both kind of be on that same page where they both play in concert with each other? Because just think about 2016 or even 2018, just how that worked. It just, you had faith, especially in 2016. If it was 3rd and long, you knew what was coming, right? In 2016, you knew it was a sack. 3rd and long, it was 100% going to be a sack. And that's not just solely due to Chris Wormley and Taco Charlton. In large part is because that quarterback, it was going to have nowhere to go thanks to the defensive backs. You can include Jabril Peppers in there as a hybrid linebacker. I want to see that type of, cohesion between the back end and the front end work together in the same way. Because I think it certainly has the capability of doing so. But I think the big question is who's going to be that other cornerback. We don't know. All right. That's going to do it for us today. We'll be back on Monday. Next week's going to be an interesting one, right? Because Thursday I'll be making my way to follow the team. And we'll probably, I don't know if we'll pre-record a mailbag or what we'll do. We'll figure that out. Friday, that might be a pre-record as well. And then we'll just try to figure out how to handle Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday as that comes. Because that's going to be a little bit different being on the road. Because it's not going to be like it's not like a bowl game or anything like that where there's like a set amount of time where I can sit there and say, all right, I'm going to dedicate this amount of time to the podcast. So I don't know. We'll figure it out. Thanks for watching. Thank you for listening. We'll be back next week. Peace.